Welcome back. Now, according to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United States, small-scale producers provide over 70% of the world's food needs, while agribusiness are important generators of employment and income worldwide. Now, improving the sustainability of food value chains can benefit millions of poor households in developing countries, as well as ensuring access to nutritious food for all. But what role does agribusiness play in fostering sustainable food systems? Today, we delve into this, and joining us is Willis Ogutu, who's the Assistant Manager, MSc, Anglophone Africa, and Chris Shimba, Policy and Research Specialist at Kenya Markets Trust. Let me take my time to introduce you one at a time. Chris Shimba, good morning, sir. How are you doing?
Good morning, Elijah. I am keeping very well. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I hope you are well.
Fantastic. Good to see you again. Let me also cross over to Willis Ogutu, who's the Assistant Manager, MSc, Anglophone Africa. Willis, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Simba. I'm happy to be here today, and I'm also hoping you're fine this morning.
Fantastic. We're happy to have you around as well. Now, Willis, let me start with you this morning. Just introduce our audience to who MSc is and your participation in the Anglophone Africa region.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so MSc in Microsoft Consulting, we are a global consulting family with presence in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and other parts of the world. We are focused on various areas of expertise, including financial inclusion, including agriculture and sustainability, including gender and youth issues. So we work with various organizations, including donor partners, government, and even other private organizations, just to help them to design their projects well, to analyze their situations, analyze policies, analyze the environments of ecosystems for business and all that, so that business thrives, sustainability is promoted, and the business environment just gets better and better. And this is why Microsave has a very big focus right now on financial inclusion and actually the aspect of sustainability, because climate change has become a very critical issue in all discussions around the world. Yes.
Pretty much. All right. Now, Chris, let's then start delving into this particular topic. Chris, when we say food systems, I mean, could you break it down and make any other person who's listening to this morning understand what a food system is? And then after that, then we'll paint for us a picture of where we are in terms of those food systems in the country.
Thank you, Simba. One of the things when we look at food systems, we have two aspects there. So, yes. Of course, we are talking about food and we are talking about system. So when you talk about food, we are looking at two major aspects. So we are looking at the aspects of nutrition, food nutrition, yes. And we are talking about the aspects of security. And we want to make it as simple as possible so that our viewers can be able to understand them.
Yes.
And so when you talk about food security, you are talking about food nutrition, then we bring in other aspects of, for example, food utilization. So you are looking at the nutritional value. You are asking whether what you are eating has some value. You are getting the nutrients you are supposed to get. We are looking at food safety. How safe is that food? And then we bring in the aspect of access. So access here, we look at, is it affordable, what you are having? Can you buy it at a good price? How is it? Is it available everywhere? And then you look at preference. For example, if what I would want to eat, is it there? Then we look at the other aspect of availability in the context of production. So, sometimes you've had these issues about we have cabbages being thrown in Kinangop and people are dying of hunger, maybe in another part of the country. So we are looking at availability. Is it available? Is it distributed? Is it something that can be easily exchanged? So in the context of food, we are looking at utilization, we are looking at access, we are looking at availability. But then when you look at now system,
yes,
is where now we bring in system. Kenyans are very popular with the word system. in the political sense. But in food, when you bring in about system, we are talking about actors. We are talking about the interactions that are within that are within the value chain. So the value chain starts right from the farmer who produces the food, and then we end up at the consumer as the food is brought on the table. So you want to look at what are the relationships, what are the interactions, who are the actors along that. So if we talk about a food system, then we are talking about the sum of all the interactions along that food value chain that ensures that we have food at the table, that addresses access, it addresses utilization, and it addresses availability. That is how simple I can make it for our viewers to understand it.
Pretty much. Chris, I'll be coming back to you on that then. Just before I cross over to that particular area, let me also cross over to Willis. Willis, Chris has given us that particular definition. He's looked at it in terms of the overall structure of exactly how we can understand the food system. Now, for you now, when you look at the country, to be specific, you can start from Kenya and then you give us a picture in Africa as well. Do we have food systems from the two perspectives that Chris has defined what a food system is then?
Yeah, thank you so much, Simba. So I would like to draw a picture of the food systems as it is right now in Kenya and as well in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we have done extensive studies on food systems across the region, and some of the critical things that we have to note, especially about Kenya's food systems, just like you mentioned, it's about the actors and their interactions, and it's along the value chains. Yes. And the value chains, I can bring it a bit earlier, it starts from pre-production. So just all the way from input supply, and then you get into the production area, and then after that you have the processing, and then after that you have, a trade and all that. So all these actors, we have to look at them wholesomely. So in Kenya, what's happening right now? We have all debates are focusing on production. When we think about agriculture, we think about production. We think about a farmer going to the farm and producing some crop. We don't think beyond that. We know there has been a focus on something called agricultural transformation, and now there is a shift towards something called food systems transformation.
Yes.
So we are trying to bring in these actors and coordinate them well in a well-organized system where each other's efforts complement the next participant or the next actor. So in Kenya right now, we are having problems in terms of productivity. We are having problems in terms of the processing. We are not processing enough as we are supposed to, because we understand that the value of agricultural commodities increases after production. So most of our farming or most of our agriculture is in terms of production, and that is really low value. So we are trying to see a way to transform this and maybe increase the contribution of agri-processing in this system. So for that to happen, there is increasing need for investment in processing, also investment in mechanization for production to also increase. And you know very well that scientific data, knowledge has told us that small-scale production is very productive and also contributes to about 70% of the food that we eat, but there is inefficiency in that area. There is an efficiency both in that production, and there is an efficiency also after harvest. That is what we call post-harvest losses.
Yes.
And that is something that is very significant. So our food systems right now is ridden with problems of post-harvest losses, problems with low productivity, problems with increasing cost of inputs. And this is very, very important because it is reducing the profit margins of our farmers and making farming less profitable. You know, you are familiar right now with the issue of sugarcane in Kenya. It is almost dead actually, sugarcane production. It is because we are being outcompeted by other countries in the region. We are producing at much higher costs than the neighboring countries. So it only makes sense to import sugar than to produce sugar locally. And this is extending to other areas. You had issues of poultry at the other time when we are having a lot of imports from Uganda because they're able to produce at a lower cost compared to us. So when they sell to our markets, they sell at a lower price, then they outcompete our farmers.
Yes.
So our food systems has broken links that need a lot of attention right now, and that is why I think the discussion we're having today is pretty critical to just try to understand what specific areas need this attention that can help us to rescue our farmers and to rescue our food production, because this is the backbone of our economy. We cannot forget that.
Pretty much. But let me cross over to you, Chris, as well. Important conversations now taking shape. Now, I would also like to ask you the same question. When you look at the country currently, Kenya, what can you place our food systems as? Can we get that picture as well from your end?
Thank you so much, Simba. Let me give a few foundational commitment that the government, for example, has made. You look at the food system. Of course, in the context of policy, this is well placed because you look at our commitment towards the Constitution. The Constitution, I think, in Article 43, Section C, is very clear about the fact that every Kenyan has a right to food, and not just about food, but about accessibility and affordability of food. But then beyond that also, you can go deeper and look at the international commitments. For example, food systems are well placed within the confines of sustainable development goals. If you look at goal number 2, for example, it talks about achieving zero hunger. Yes. And also goal number 12 talks about responsible consumption and production. But that is not enough. The government's Big Four agenda concentrates heavily when it comes to food nutrition and food security. And of course, one of the key policy documents that today guides government decisions within the agriculture sector is the Agricultural Sector Transformation and Growth Strategy, which actually presents the government's commitment to reforming the sector, and that talks about what my brother Willis has talked about, because it now talks about output productivity, increasing output productivity, boosting incomes in agribusiness, and ensuring household resilience and food security. But then, now, bring it down and look at the actual picture where we are. And Willis has put it very well, because when now we look at, yes, those are documents, those are very outstanding documents, but what is the situation like? Yeah. There are people that are actually going without food. There are many cases where food distribution is not perfect. If we talk about processing, quite low. If you talk about also the production at the farmer, every time we talk about food system, one thing that I always remember from the days I went to school is about the farm to fork. It's a very good way that you are talking about, from the farmer up to the person who is consuming using a fork. I don't know why we thought about the fork, but then there are so many issues around that food system and that value chain that needs to be addressed. Food production in Kenya is driven majorly by 70% of it is by small-scale farmers, meaning that those who are in the food system particularly are people who are having 1 to 2 acres of land. Yes. And that then tells you that when we are coming up with our policies, when we are looking at food systems in Kenya, we must target that small-scale farmer. That small-scale farmer has issues with input. The input prices, which Willis has alluded to, are a bit high compared to our neighbors. Our neighbors are able to produce the same output, but at a slightly cheaper prices. And so we are not competitive. Again, if you look at the food systems in Kenya, who are the people behind the production at the production level? These people who are behind the production, if you look at the farmers, our farmers are characterized by a slightly older generation. So the youth that are a bigger population, who have strength, who have the ideas, are not in the food system. meaning that our food system in Kenya is not inclusive. So talk about women, talk about that we target with most of our policies, and
Yes.
who are great contributors and people who are very important when it comes to the food system, are locked out because of the way our food system has been structured. It is not very, very pleasing to the youth to engage in it. The processing, the cost, the capital is quite high. The financial implications for our youth is not something that really encourages us. Yet, the food system in Kenya provides a very good background through which we can actually employ more people, we can have creation. But allow me, even as I allow also Willis to chip in,
Yes.
is the fact that when you talk about the environmental aspects, we cannot talk about food systems without talking about resilience, without talking about how it responds to the environmental issues. And so, Kenya, we have faced a number of environmental issues, even as we speak now. So when floods come, we don't know what to do with that much water. It destroys all the food systems that we have. When a drought comes, then you wonder whether there existed floods at some point. When locusts come, all these things. So the environmental bit has not been really looked into so much, because our agriculture is purely rain-fed, and we cannot compete internationally with people who have mastered the art of addressing environmental issues. So as we speak, Simba, one of the things that is very important, because we are talking about sustainable food system.
Yes.
So we are supplying the food to the people that are living today, but we are also careful to think about the future generations, those who are coming after us. That must bring in an environmental aspect, must look at the population demographics. Who are the majority of the people who are living? Are they involved? Our farmers that are engaged in this business, are they involved? In the process of distribution, who are the people that are involved? What challenges do we face along that? And the informalities that are around that, including one thing that I know we'll talk about later maybe, the multiple taxes and fees that are charged. You move from one county to another county, one county to another county. This is not promoting business and is making agribusiness not to be a very key drive of sustainable food system.
Fantastic. I like the way you've spread that entire conversation. Let me also bring in Willis to also open up onto that direction. Willis, you see, on paper, and if you look at especially our country, you will see that indeed food security is well enshrined within our medium to long-term goals, especially under the Vision 2030. It's quite clear on exactly what we need to do and where we need to go. But Willis, let me just remind you, Vision 2030 is just 8 years from now. So let me ask you, when you look at these policies that we have on paper, and that's the same story across the entire of the Africa region, what has failed in terms of implementing it so that we move to a more food secure future? Where is the disconnect, Willis, from what you're saying this morning?
Thank you so much, Kia Simba. That is a very critical question and a very interesting one. But before I answer that, let me just add on something that Chris Shimba mentioned about sustainability and environmental aspects when talking about the food systems. So I just read a report one time, a World Bank report. It was established in 2021. Published in 2021. That's last year. And it said that agriculture is a major part of the climate problem, and it currently generates about 30% of the total greenhouse gas emissions. And the report said that without action, the percentage could rise substantially, and other sectors could also reduce their emissions. So, and it also said that a third of the food that is produced globally is either lost or wasted. This is something that is supposed to be very, 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 very sad. A third of the food that we struggle to produce so much is lost or wasted when other people are dying of hunger in other parts of the world. So again, just the issue of distribution that Chris mentioned, that is something that is very critical, and that is something that we have to consider. So back to your question about the disconnect in terms of what is on paper and what's in reality.
Yes.
There's a lot, actually, but one of the things that you will hear being mentioned so much is political will. Policy is policy documents or any documents are there for the people to implement or not to implement. And some people have different priorities that are in many cases motivated by political ambitions or polisons. So politics is not, when I mean politics, I don't mean campaigns for elections or that kind of stuff. Politics is a science, the science of people and managing them and pleasing them and making them happy. So if, for example, government in place today finds a document that was made like 5 years ago, or a declaration that was made 5 or 10 years ago, and then they come in, they made promises to their voters. They want to focus on these promises. They want to focus on building infrastructure, things that will make people happy. They want to please you with declarations of UHC. They want to please people with declarations of many things that they know will immediately excite people and make them happy. But there are things that are very critical and very important for the economy, like agriculture and the policies around agriculture and food production, which are not exactly exciting things for the masses. So then what does a politician think about? He wants to excite the masses. So the policies will be implemented, but not at a pace that is showing any focus. So they for example, allocation of funds.
Yes.
If you're talking about some kind of activity at a given a certain time, we need to allocate enough funds for that to be achieved. But that doesn't really happen. If you're talking about the technical capacity, do we have the technical capacity to achieve our ambitions in terms of our policies, what we want to do? Maybe they don't build that capacity as much. Are the institutions well coordinated? Not always. So you get lots of institutional disconnect. This institution was created to do this purpose. You hear there is this duplication of roles. You hear there are battles battles for power. This executive here and this executive there, they want to be the ones to be on the forefront. So there is no professionalism. There is no not enough technical capacity, or there is no political will to make some of these things that exist in documents a reality. So there is just a focus on things that will make people happy, but not things that will really give a true boost to the economy. So it's easier to promise somebody a stadium or a nice road somewhere than to tell them I will improve productivity in your farm. It doesn't make sense to them. Even if I tell them I'll subsidize the fertilizers, I'm only appealing to a small portion of the population, which is the farmers.
Yes.
So politically, I don't want to do that. I want to appeal to as many people as possible. So I look for things that will make more sense to more people. So I think that is one of the reasons why we are lagging behind in terms of implementing what our policies are. It is known that Kenya has some of the best policy documents, some of the best strategic plans, but the problem comes in terms of implementation, both funds, resource allocation, political will, and also technical capacity.
Interesting.
So I think that is one thing that really
interesting.
think about.
I like the way you end that point there, Willis. Let me bring in Chris. Chris, you hear? I mean, it's like we know where the problems are, but we've come from the point where we understand what our food systems are, what they should be, and what we need to do to get there. But then that's on paper, and then you hear what Willis is saying. Willis is saying, well, if you look at the political will, if you look at the speed of implementing these things, that's where the disconnect begins. Then, Chris, somebody would ask you then, I mean, if you look particularly for our country right now, I mean, Vision 2030, on which food security and the fight for hunger is well embedded in, it's just 8 years from now. I mean, you even say 7 years from now. So what needs to be done now within those policies then, Chris? What we need to see for us to say, well, we are making the right strides in that direction then, Chris?
Thank you so much, Elijah. You know, I like Willis' approach.
Yes.
He's putting it very strongly. I want to give another view of hope. That, of course, there is effort that is being made, and that is where we are looking at. But I think one of the things is the realization of the role of agriculture. Because you see, when we talk about food systems, we are focused majorly, we are looking at agriculture. And the realization of agriculture needs to be something that is communicated to all of us, and we understand the value of agriculture. For example, we are talking about a sector that contributes over 31.5% to the GDP. That is not a small sector. That is a sector that requires attention. So we need to get the right attention from the government, both at the national and at the county government, because this is not a sector to joke with. You think about the contribution of agriculture in terms of supporting about 38% of the population are purely within the agriculture, are working within the agriculture framework. And you talk about a sector that supplies food to over 75% of what is within that sector is actually putting food on the table of the people. So I think one of the things that we must all understand is that what is the role of agriculture? What is the role of agribusiness within the food system? What does it contribute? Once we have clear understanding of that, then that is the starting point. The second thing is we know agriculture has been devolved. And agriculture having been devolved, it is now a function of county governments. But that does not mean that the national government has no role. Of course, the national government has a role in that. The national government now deals majorly with the policy issues. But if you look, Simba, at county government allocations to agriculture, you will be shocked. For example, even in counties where you see that the mainstay, the main economic activity is actually agriculture in terms of crops, in terms of livestock. But you look at what they allocate for agriculture, you will be shocked. You will wonder, really, do these people really understand the value of agriculture? So again, the other thing, what must be done now? We must look at our budget allocations to agriculture. Let us increase our allocations, understanding that livestock, understanding that crops, aquaculture, forestry, and all this are contributing an amazing work to GDP, to economic growth, to employment. And so we need to have, our allocation, our budget allocation should reciprocate to the value of agriculture. The third point is, let us involve all the value chain. So I think this is what Willis has really stressed on, that when we look at when we look at food systems, when we look at agribusiness, we are starting from the farm. We are moving through that journey from production up to the consumption where we have the consumers. So let's involve the whole value chain. And when you are involving the whole value chain, what I mean here, it is not telling them what they need to do. Let them share with you, give you the views, and bring in the understanding in terms of what your contribution, what should work from the farm for the farmer, what should work for the distributors, what should work for the processors, what should work for the consumer. The desire of the consumer, interestingly, is to get that food at a very low price. The desire of the farmer is to get the highest value of what he has produced. But in between here, they are called brokers, and I'm not saying they are bad. Brokers are good, but the shorter the value chain, the better for the consumer and the better for the farmer. But once we bring in people that are going to play along this value, they will tell the farmer that, I have to pay taxes, I have to pay all these things. They give the value the poor price. When they reach the consumer, they again tell the consumer that, I have had a lot of costs along the way. So the food finally reaches the consumer at a very high price. So then these people benefit when they are actually, their role is very minimal within that value chain. So involve all the value chain players and look at who plays the greatest role and make sure that there is reward. What we're talking about in Rift Valley, which is the food basket of Kenya, Kitale, talk about Uasin Gishu, the Trans Nzoia and all that, you will see that quite a number of people now have stopped, for example, growing maize because they are not seeing value for maize. There is no value for money. You invest so much, but you end up getting poor remuneration. And some of them are switching to sugarcane. Sugarcane is not getting the value. Some switching to avocado. Avocado, the value for export and all that is not. This is not the kind of market we will really want to have. We will really want to be in a situation where everybody is happy. And that brings me to the second point, that ensure that we have transparency and mutual trust along the various value chains. Do we trust each other? Do I trust the farmer, that the farmer is producing food, obeying all the good agricultural practices, that I am not buying the mboga that I'm eating, I'm not eating vegetables that have been sprayed within the day and has been brought to the market. So these are the trust, transparency as we do agriculture. If we are going to export, then can our food system, can our food be exported to the other countries? Do they meet the regulatory requirements, the standards that are required?
Yes.
And then the issues that we are talking about, post-harvest losses. We have harvested, yes, we have gotten the best of this, but then there is some losses that are incurred. An animal, for example, moves from northeastern, from Garissa, and is taken to Nairobi, and you bring that animal, and then you don't even take it, you just slaughter it. Of course, I'm not agricultural specialist, but there is a lot of weight loss that has occurred. What of if you took it for fattening within some 2 days? That is one way of addressing that loss, post-harvest loss, so that there is value. It has got the weight that is required. If you have harvested maize, do you have the right mechanisms to make sure that there is no loss in terms of that maize aflatoxin and all those things? So that needs to be really looked into. Do we have the right storage? Do we make sure that we address some of those issues? That is going to be very important. But now, one controversial thing that I want to bring in is the issue of aggregation. Farmers get value of their products when they have come together as a group. So the issues of cooperatives may not be working so well, but I think cooperatives champions farmers' interest, that is run profession, that has got the right governance in place. That is something that we must think to protect our farmers, to protect the processors, to protect the distributors, to protect even the consumers. The consumer rights, the consumer voice is not heard. It's too weak. Can the consumer say we are not going to consume this? So those cooperatives, the right cooperatives, must also be able to be put in place. But I think also, as much as we have the right policies, we still lack in certain aspects in terms of certain policies that needs to be there. The food safety bill that is being moved into, that is being worked on, needs to be concluded. We need also to make sure that once we have the right policies in place, let those policies be implemented to the latter with commitment and dedication for the good of the farmer and the consumer.
Pretty much. But Willis, if you can take a minute, because we only have around 3 minutes left. There's still one more question that I'd like for you to look into. Willis, you mentioned something very critical, and also Chris is actually highlighting on that any other person who's critical to that value chain needs to get a better reward. Willis, we are saying on paper, we are there, we figure exactly what we need to be or what we need to do in the longer term, but then there's a disconnect in between. Willis, do you think there's a stress on rewarding the critical aspects of our value chain? Case in point, just creating more incentives to banks and financial institutions who may want to go into this area of agriculture and food security, because they do know in the long term there will be a better reward, because then we need to defranchise it from the political class, from the government, and then let it to private players if indeed we are going to achieve anything.
Thank you so much. That is a very critical question, and you've mentioned something very important there that I'm going to discuss. But before I go there, my friend Chris mentioned something about budgetary allocations, and I would just like to add a small point on that. We know the Malabo Declaration, and the target for that was to have at least 10% of national budget allocated to agriculture. In Kenya, I think we only have about 2.4%. You can imagine how far that is from the target. And this declaration was made in 2014. How many years have been since then? So that is something that is really a food for thought. Let's think about that. Are we having that commitment? Is the government committed to doing anything? And that brings me to say, if we want to develop our agriculture, we cannot leave it in the hands of government.
Yes.
Government alone is not enough to do what needs to be done in agriculture. And that is why we need to have more private sector participation. And I must commend something that, in the old days, extension was an exclusively government role. Recently, extension has mostly gone to the private sector. And that is something that has been very successful. The private sector is doing it better than government was doing it, and that is an indication that agriculture transformation or growth or development cannot only work when government is involved. So talking about incentives for taking part in agriculture, financial institutions. One of the biggest problems with Kenyan agriculture and actually African agriculture in general is the issue of financial access.
Yes.
People do not have money to invest. We're talking about farm mechanization. We're talking about value addition. We're talking about trading, international trade. Who will be able to afford to buy tractors for their farm or even afford to pay for them? Yes, people are doing that, but that it's very low in Kenya. Mechanization is very low. So then how do we incentivize mechanization? How do we incentivize use of technology in agriculture? Because we cannot forget about the role of technology when you talk about agriculture. I know Kenya is one of the best in terms of productivity in the region, but that is just being a king among peasants. We are not really competitive globally. We are competitive comparing ourselves to maybe Rwanda, Burundi, DRC, Uganda here. So when we look at the numbers, we say Kenya's productivity is a bit higher. We have more research. We've done better in dairy. We've done better in that. But that is something still very low. So how can we compete globally? We have to increase access to finance.
Yes.
We have to increase R&D. Research and development. How do we get new information to get to the farmers? How do we get new methods of production? How do we get more improved varieties? I know Caldro is doing very good work,
yes,
but there still needs more to be done. And back to my point on financial access, banks are very afraid of lending to the agriculture sector. Mm-hmm. Agriculture sector, I think, is one of the lowest lend sectors in this country. I have spoken to many people, especially and even youths, and their experience is that when they want to go to the bank, if they're farmers, to take a loan, they have to go and take a different kind of loan. They want to take like, I'm doing business, I'm doing this business and that, I have these assets, you can use them as security. But if you go that I'm a farmer, I produce French beans or I produce maize, I want a loan to buy inputs or blah, blah. Yes, there are chances, but the requirements are so outrageous sometimes, and banks are really jittery about lending to this sector. So then what can be done in that case? Something called credit guarantees, something called risk-sharing facilities. If there can be risk-sharing facilities, even if it's not from government, from development partners, where they go to the bank and tell them, you know what, we want you to lend to the agribusiness sector, and I know we know there are lots of risk, but what we will do, we have this amount of money, we will put it somewhere. If there will be defaults, we will at least help you to cover a certain percentage of that default, so that you at least de-risk agriculture, the risk lending in agriculture.
Yes.
So that is one strategy that can really work for us. Even if government can do it, if development partners can do it, it will be very great. It will allow financial service providers to lend more to the agriculture sector, and that will help us to boost our productivity. That will help us to mechanize our farms. That will help us to become more competitive in the region. Another incentive that we have to think about: every country in this world, most developed countries, they survive on subsidies, which is not the best recommendation, but it works. Of course, subsidies also have their downsides. For example, I was reading a story where in India there was subsidies for energy for pumping water. So if you're pumping water using electricity or fuel, whatever you're using, then the government would subsidize that cost. And then it was realized that after some time, farmers were now wasting the water, wasting the energy, and not seeing the value out of it. Sometimes when we subsidize or we over subsidize, then we tend to shift from focusing on efficiency to start looking at just we have this and let's use it. You know what? Let's use it. Yes. But subsidies, when used properly, work, because they help us to reduce our cost of production. If government cannot reduce cost of electricity or cost of energy, then they have to find another way. If government cannot reduce the cesses and levies, then it has to find another way. Right now, there is fuel subsidy that has helped to keep the fuel price stable. Why don't do that with agriculture then? There are many other subsidies that are working in other sectors. We can also bring this into agriculture and make these subsidies work for us and let them be stable, let them be well researched, not just somebody waking up in the office and thinking about subsidy and coming up with our not well cooked, our not properly baked subsidy program. But the thing is, subsidies can really work for us and it can incentivize production. Another thing is incentivizing youth participation in agriculture.
Yes.
Because we're talking about inclusion. Any economic sector, any sector of the economy can develop when everyone is included. We've always been talking about women inclusion. That has driven growth globally. When women participate in the economy, in different parts of the economy, there is growth. Now, how about agriculture? Yes, women are said to be the biggest participants in agriculture. Now, let's bring in the youth. They have the technical skills, they have the energy, they have everything that is required for participation in agriculture. And when we're bringing them in, the debate is not supposed to be around production. There is more to agriculture than just production. We can bring in youth in terms of logistics. We can bring in youth in terms of agri innovations, technologies. We can bring in youth in trade. I have met youth who only do promotion, marketing, social media marketing of agricultural produce. I have met youths who do very many different things around agriculture, but not necessarily in production, offering technical services. They offer get into youth groups and buy machinery and list them to farmers. This is inclusion, and this will drive growth in agriculture. So this will incentivize more and more people to participate. Last night I was in a discussion, one of these spaces on Twitter, and it was about the perceptions of youth in agriculture.
Yes.
And one of the speakers mentioned something that was very important to me. Agriculture doesn't look cool, and that is something that has been said over and over. So young people are not really into agriculture because it doesn't look cool. So he was trying to draw comparison between agriculture and something like football, soccer. You see soccer stars coming with their fancy cars. You hear they have very nice mansions. So there is that publicity that entice that kind of direction. Look at the music industry and that kind of stuff. So what about agriculture? Can something like that happen? Can we paint a cool picture of agriculture? Can we see success stories of farmers who have made it very well in agriculture? Can we see their big mansions, their big farms, or their nice tractors, or their nice money, so
Yes.
that people see that there is value in agriculture, so that more people get interested, more participate, and I think in that case, we will transform our agriculture. But one thing we also have not to forget, for economic transformation, agriculture is supposed to form smaller and smaller contribution to the GDP and also employment. This is something that may sound controversial, but the more agriculture contributes to the economy, the more it contributes to employment. That is an indication of not a very good performing economy. So then what do? We shift people from agriculture production into other areas like support services. When the service sector in agriculture grows, I think the economy grows even much. When the processing sector grows, the economy will even grow even faster. So we are supposed to start having a paradigm shift in terms of discussing agricultural transformation and think about what's called food systems transformation. And when we are doing incentives or subsidies or anything, look at the value chain in totality, not just production, not a specific part. So that would be my take for this, and thank you so much.
Pretty much. Gentlemen, I mean, there's a lot that we really have to go through this. Chris, you would really agree with me that 30 minutes of conversation on really where we are in terms of food systems in the country and in Africa is not really enough. Let me talk to my producer after this. We're going to have another session, call it a town hall session, where we'll bring even youth on board and sit down and really have a deeper conversation on this. I'd like to say thank you very much, Chris and Willis, for taking your time this morning to speak to us on this particular topic. Take those gentlemen back online. #business. Thank you very much for those who are already active on it. That conversation continues. Where are we in terms of our food systems in the country and the continent as well? Key to take home is that indeed, when you look at us and compare with our neighbors, you will say we're doing good. But then when you look at where we are in terms of global numbers, that's where we start now to look at how we are feeling as a country. That from Willis this morning. We take a short break. Once we come back, Economic Review.